Good afternoon, and welcome to the 2020 Community Stories Film Festival, virtual edition. My name is Camila Martin Proctor, and this is the question and answer for the Invalid Corps film. We'll be taking audience questions during the second half of our conversation, so please feel free to submit your questions for our panelists in the comments section. The recording of the Q&A will be available on the Docs in Progress YouTube channel later today. The Community Stories Film Festival runs through the end of today, so make sure to check out the films during this evening being offered. They've all been wonderful. We are here today speaking with Steve Pham and Ms. Day Al Mohammed. Welcome to the stage, family.
Thanks for having us. I'm honored to be here.
Oh, thank you. Hi, Day. Thank you so much for joining us.
I'm thrilled and excited, and I hope folks enjoyed the film.
Oh, I know everybody did. I know personally that I did. It is so moving and such a wonderful piece of history and artwork all together. I wanted to kind of start us off with just something fun, just a little something. Since it is the holiday season, I want you to tell me something that we can't necessarily read on your bio. Day, can you tell me, as a filmmaker, what is one of your favorite Christmas movies?
So actually, I will do you one better. I will not give you one Christmas movie, but I will tell you another thing about me. I love Christmas movies, all
Oh,
Christmas movies. So every year from November 15 to January 15, my wife signs me up for every channel that does those. And basically, I keep a little list, and I watch. Last year, I watched 23 separate Christmas movies, and I'm hoping to beat that this year. So it's a big thing with me. So no, there's not one favorite. I just watch them all.
You watch Christmas movies before Thanksgiving?
Well, yeah, just a little before Thanksgiving.
Okay,
she's a disruptor.
I
I
know.
love it.
I can't get them all in
Well,
if I don't
Steve,
them.
yeah, same question to you. What is one of your favorite Christmas holiday movies?
I guess every year I watch the Christmas Vacation with the Griswolds. I mean, it's classic. It
That's
always makes me
classic.
laugh, and I know the lines very well. I share clips online with my friends, and so I think it's a good way of kind of bringing together, um, everyone together for the holidays, even if we're far apart. So.
Oh, wow. That's beautiful. I know that that's definitely going to be something that will definitely help bring everybody together, especially this season. I
Absolutely.
kind of wanted to start slowly because I know we're going to have so many questions coming in through the comments. But Day, I wanted to ask you specifically, as a member of the auxiliary service of the U.S. Coast Guard, I know some people may not know that about you, that you actually work to support the U.S. Coast Guard's mission outside of any direct law enforcement in that, in military engagement. You do a lot with the rescue missions and water safety. How did making this film affect you personally in that role?
Wow. I think like for many folks, veterans and veteran issues are something very deep and personal to them. And so for me, getting the chance to work with folks who are active duty Coast Guard, but also many members of the Coast Guard Auxiliary are also retired military. Um, just the things I heard from these amazing men and women and the things they did. Um, it's kind of one of those inspiring things. And then finding out this story about this Veteran Reserve Corps, about this Invalid Corps, and I'll be you'll hear those terms used interchangeably. And part of that's because the Invalid Corps is the term that was used maybe only for the first year and a half or so, and then it became the Veteran Reserve Corps. But because the focus of the film is very much on the disability and chronic illness aspect, I use the term Invalid Corps throughout. So if you guys hear me using that term all the time, that's why. But also as a person with a disability, I wanted to talk about the stories and the contributions of the men in the Civil War who continued in their service even after what were very traumatic events. And so I think for me, that was one of the things, was to make sure that that part of that story was told, because a lot of it isn't something that you can see or find. And I know when we started making the film, I think it was almost 5 years ago, I think we found a couple of journal articles, some stuff in the Civil War Times magazines, but that was it. There wasn't anything else really visible out there. And I will say, in the last few years, man, the NPS has done so much to preserve a lot of the stories and things around that you just can't find. And so that's kind of one of the biggest things for us, is to be able to show that bit of history that would otherwise be completely lost.
Wow. Thank you so much. Steve, with your academic and professional background as a military history scholar, specifically of the Civil War and the professional outlook, how did this film affect you? I know that you have a specific concentration with regards to Asian and Pacific Islanders and their role in the Civil War. What did you feel? How did the film affect you from that perspective?
Well, first, I'd like to congratulate Day. I know it's been quite the process, and we've been communicating with each other, I guess, for a couple of years now in regards to the documentary. And it was something that's been needed. I think the Veteran Reserve Corps, or the Invalid Corps, has been kind of in the backdrop of American Civil War history for the last 150 years. So I think people that are interested in the Civil War, they might hear about this organization from time to time, but they don't know much about it. They really are on the periphery. So, and I think there's a lot of people in American history that are on the periphery, they're often forgot about, that have stories and narratives and perspectives and families and these experiences in peace and war that they may have written down, or someone may have written it about them. They might have taken some images. They might have been a part of a battle, even a campaign or something, right? So I think this provides a lot of insight to understanding a much wider context of the American Civil War, of American history, and of just human beings in general. I think that's why this is so important, which applies to a lot of my research with Asian Pacific Islanders, African Americans, formerly enslaved, especially the ones that came into Washington, D.C., the ones that served in the forts, the ones that joined the United States colored troops, that became nurses, right? There's just so many stories that are just waiting to be uncovered again, right? And I think it's the role of historians to amplify those voices. That's our job.
Oh wow, that is wonderful. And I'm just looking a little bit here in the chat in the documents, and it keeps popping up that people are saying that they really enjoyed this film and that they had no idea about the stories of these people in the Invalid Corps. So the history that you guys are bringing to life for everyone is critical and important, and we truly do appreciate it. I want you to know and understand that is important, not just for us, but for the next generation. As you said, a lot of these things could very easily get lost. Day, another question for you, and I know that you are doing a lot of other work and a lot of different projects, and hopefully we'll get a little chance to talk about those. But what would you like to see next with regards to the Invalid Corps?
Oh, I think one of the things I'm hoping, and we're starting to see it now, is it showing up in more discussions of history and more places. So when it comes to veterans history, that it is actually mentioned specifically, because it's only in the last few years that the military has actually built programs for soldiers who acquired disabilities, so they could actually continue to do some of the work and to stay within the military. I know within other militaries, they've made ways for folks with disabilities who would choose to serve their nation to find ways to do it. Okay. And we don't have that here. And I think part of it is there's a culture and a legacy that we're missing. And as far as the disability community, disability is something that is to be seen and not seen. It is stigmatized. It is pitied. It's a tragedy. Yes. And what people forget is that folks with disabilities have existed, for millennia, and have been contributing members to society, have not just inclusion, but have driven change in society. And I think this is a great example. And obviously you can clearly see this is something that I'm passionate about, and that the film kind of aligned nicely with, because it's like, no, there were things that they did that are amazing, and it's it's something that as a community, that's a part of the culture and history that kids, particularly young kids, we're never taught. We're never taught about those kind of achievements and accomplishments. So for me, I'm happy to see it start showing up as chapters in books by historians, to see journal articles, see folks picking it apart. And what's even cooler is when folks have said, hey, I had a great grandfather who was in like XYZ regiment. And I love this. I had somebody at one of our screenings, and they didn't know anything. They just know his name, and it was in this. And I think I want to say it was the 22nd Regiment. I don't remember, but I just remember we hit that point in the movie, and it says, and they were talking about the placements of the different regiments of the Invalid Corps, and I pointed when we hit the same name. I'm like, right there, that's where your great grandfather was. And to be able to point to something, to exactly what they had done as being a part of that regiment. So it's also a personal history for a lot of families. Okay, I'm going to stop there.
No, that must have been an amazing moment, an amazing moment. Steve, question to you. What would you like to see next? What would you, if you had a ask, what would be the next chapter for this movement that you guys have started with regards to really digging into this history?
I think that's a great question, and thanks for your thoughts as well there, Day, because that's one of my favorite experiences as a historian and as someone that works for the Park Service, is when visitors or the public reaches out to us and be like, hey, I had so-and-so in my family that served at this site. Do you have more information? And we share more information, and they're just absolutely thrilled about that. What I want to see moving forward here is, and I think we can use the Invalid Corps, the Veteran Reserve Corps, to really illustrate this, about the complexities of the Civil War far away from the battlefield. And a lot of these men did serve on the battlefield and were wounded or had suffered, illness during their campaigns of active duty. And they were sent to what they called rear echelon duties to, enforce the draft and guard government buildings and stand in the forts and things like that. But the soldiers didn't fight every day. Soldiers didn't fight every day during the war. But they lived in this existence of being a citizen soldier for a select amount of time, however long this war was, right? And so they wrote letters home, and they wrote into newspaper accounts back home, and they really shared their thoughts about what this conflict meant. And as the war evolved, right, and they're talking about elections, they're talking about the destruction of slavery, and they're talking about African Americans getting the right to vote. There's a lot that we could really understand here. So my hope moving forward is, I understand that we manage a lot of battlefields in the Park Service and other public land type of sites, but I'm really interested to see visitors come in and talk about the war beyond the battlefield, right? And we've really seen this shift happen within the past 10 or 15 years, and I believe that's going to continue to happen. But I'm hoping that people come in and start asking about the Invalid Corps, and saying, I just want to gain a little bit more understanding of them.
Oh, thank you so much for that answer. And forgive me, I was taking little notes right there. You said citizen soldier. I was like, okay, I have got to type that out and follow up back in my own personal time to really kind of dig into that. That's wonderful. Thank you so much.
It's a major concept that was, in many ways, it was, I don't want to say something just uniquely American, but it was about this idea of having a republic, and we don't have to have a large standing army. And so they volunteered to serve. And when the war was over, these men and women went home. And so I think a lot of the studies moving forward now is what happens when they get home. What does it mean to be a veteran in that time period? What does it mean to be a wounded veteran, right? Or a veteran that has a disability, right? That's really important, I think, for us to understand the complexities of society then and now as well.
Absolutely. Dave, there's a quick question for you in the chat, and I say quick facetiously in the sense that I think the answer might be a little bit more detailed than a quick turnaround. How did you first learn about the Invalid Corps, and what inspired you to not just, write a paper, you're a prolific author in that post, but then to just make this into a film medium?
So let's start with libraries. I love libraries. I love them so much. I married a librarian. So she actually came across, and I think most folks, that's what their first exposure to the Invalid Corps is a song. Is a song, and it's making fun of them, and it's denigrating them. The idea, like, I've been injured. Oh, sorry, can't go to war. Peace out, y'all. Sort of a song, and it's like, all right, it's at that time it's pretty hard to think about the idea of this kind of a song being, and it strikes me, still being around and to be made up about nothing. And so I started digging a little bit more. I'm like, well, okay, was there an Invalid Corps? What did they do? Who were they? And then so I ended up being a little piece here, a little piece there, and then it slowly started building into something bigger. And then I started looking at individual units and like, well, what were things that different groups did? I'm like, wait, they guarded these prisons. Wait, they were in the New York draft riots. Wait, what? And then come to find out that what I thought was one of their biggest events was like right in my backyard. And I think that's one of the big things is there's so many things that take place in our neighborhoods, in our neighborhood parks, in our neighborhood communities, and that are stories and histories that are so like amazing and rich, and we just don't think to look. So I think I guess that's where it got started. So I'll blame my wife for the start of it, and then from there it was finding more and more things that were just fascinating, and then building them into a larger story. I think that's the way it is for most folks. You tug at a little string, and then you find out there's more to that story.
Absolutely. It's a small follow-up to that question. They're curious in our chat group as they're talking back and forth, and as it's coming in, believe me, I just keep seeing over and over again, thank you so much for this film. Thank you. It was so wonderful. Thank you so much for the work that you do telling these stories, especially in the community. They want to know what was particularly challenging about putting the visuals of this film together.
Ooh. Finding a lot of them would be a big part. If you think about it, photography at the time, a lot of stills and a lot of portraiture, not as many kind of action shots, sort of a thing. So which is the reason we ended up relying on reenactments. We actually found a great way to animate some of the stills and the woodcuts just a little bit to visually keep it interesting. But I think that's part of the reason we did a film, right? I'm like, I am not going to read a paper about the Civil War. I like history. I'm like, I've done tons of it. I don't want to, but a film, people will watch a film. And as someone said at a conference a few years ago, nobody ever cried over a white paper.
That's true.
That's true.
You can catch people's attention and interest and excitement, in a 20-minute film, whereas trying to, if I said, hey, here's a Civil War paper, Camilla, about something in Ward 4, would you read it? Or if I said, here's this fun movie, much more likely to get your attention.
I hear that. Steve, same question to you. I mean, as a historian, how hard is it to really find these pieces of history? Where are they hidden, and should we be banging on people's doors to bring them to us?
That's a great question. I think it's actually easier than a lot of people believe. So I think so. I've been reading some of the questions, right? And someone's I think Miriam had a really great question about like, how does this type of history get erased from military history? And I think that's a great question. And I think the simple answer is because when we think about the Civil War and when we visit battlefields, we think of the people that are there, the battles and leaders, right? The tactics and things like that, the engagement, the skirmish and the tactics and things like that. And that tends to be the focus. In many cases, that's about it. But there's so much more depth and complexity that we really need to focus on, right? I mean, so Dave was talking about some of those images that we have of the Veteran Reserve Corps. We've got a great image of one in DC, and the officer, you could tell, is missing his arm. He lost his arm in action, and his sleeve is like pinned to his uniform there, right? So even in images, it could tell us quite a bit. There's images of the Veteran Reserve Corps all over Washington, D.C. And the reason why we know is because we can see monuments in the background, right? We know which monument it is, right? So I think being in D.C., where we had a 2-day battle, a relatively small battle, which the Veteran Reserve Corps was heavily engaged in, by the way, including a Medal of Honor recipient. I'll be sharing that in the coming weeks for the Civil War defenses of Washington. We had 4 years of history, though. 4 years of active Civil War history, right? And so the stories and the narratives are there. You just have to do a little bit of digging, and I always say that there's layers of history, And it's our job as historians to just kind of open them up, unravel them, and share them with the public. And that's what we've been doing.
I love
That
that.
is
I think
amazing. Thank you so much.
exactly, because the wars and the battles had, you know, I mean, some regiments even had their own regimental historians.
Exactly.
When you start digging, it's like we did the Army Heritage and Education. You start finding individual letters from soldiers and their families, and then you start finding letters from several soldiers who were in the same unit, and the letters are about the same time. Then you start to have a picture of what their lives were like, and that's where the real fun things came from. Like I am super excited that we were able to use some of the drawings and the story of Alfred Bellard.
Yes.
And we hunted down the family actually to get permission to use those images. They were in a book that was published several years ago, and it's gone out of print. And you'll see the images pop up on the internet. But we had somebody who joined the Invalid Corps team, who's a private investigator, who helped us find the folks who had this direct connection, and they were just fabulously supportive and let us actually use those. But those personal stories and those personal images. And I know we talked to a couple other folks who said, well, I've got my great whatever's diary. And I'm like, really? So the letters and things at the Army Heritage and Education Center, or the National Archive has collections of letters and things as well, many of which that have not been, they're written in script. They haven't been shifted over to digital. And there is a project, if you can volunteer to help read those and actually type it in so it becomes searchable. There's this vast amount of knowledge, and there are smaller museums all over the country that have personal letters from their communities, and those are where, like Steve said, you keep digging under the layers, you start finding more of those kinds of stories.
Oh, that sounds amazing. A lot of what you seem to be speaking about, it almost sounds as if you guys are both a little bit of detectives.
Oh, absolutely.
Does it
Yes.
feel like that occasionally?
Yeah, it
Okay.
does. And you know what, the thing, Jay was talking about primary source letters and newspaper accounts, diaries especially. What I love about reading these is it just shows that humans are human beings, right? Because I've read
Yes.
and so when you read a historic document, you believe you're just going to find an inspirational line every single line you read, and then soldiers will be like, "It snowed today. Period. That's it." That's all he said. It's like, okay. And then the next day he's like, it snowed some more, period. You know, like I appreciate him taking time to jot down those notes, right? But then like a couple months later, they're getting ready to like march on campaign. And you could tell his letters started getting longer, right? Because things started to get more serious, you know? So he's really having to kind of focus on expressing like what he's feeling at that moment. So you can even see that transition. You connected to what perhaps what someone else in that regiment is saying, or what's happening nationally around the country or in the city that they're in or the region, and you can really start to put together a bigger picture. So yeah, I mean, it's like watching the first 48. You put pieces together.
I love that. That is a great reference. Day, we have a question for you from the chat, and I find this one very interesting. Was there anything you wanted to include in the film but had to cut? And does that mean there's a part 2 coming?
There is, but probably not for part 2. And actually, this is one of those things where I will actually eventually I will punt it over when I'm done back to Steve. So in the film, there's a section on Elizabeth Proctor Thomas. And when I was making this film, partway through, I realized that she had taken over minutes and minutes of the story. I'm like, wait. It's supposed to be about the soul. It's supposed to be about disability, but just as a personality and as her story, not just hers like right around then Civil War, but her family from past through then into the future and about her is amazing. And I'll be honest, you guys have done Civil War defense. Have done so much to preserve parts of that story, and so there's a lot more to Elizabeth Proctor Thomas. And I know there've been a couple of small documentaries. She deserves a big documentary that actually covers a lot more of her and her family. So that's probably a bigger one. And I guess I lied though. I did not talk about any of the things related to what was being guarded at the prisons and some of the amazing. The conspiracy to free the Confederate soldiers at one of the big prisons in Chicago. So there's some other great stories in there, but the biggest one was Elizabeth Proctor Thomas, who almost ran away with my whole documentary.
Well, we appreciate that.
Yes. Steve, a question for you in the chat asked, were the Invalid Corps unique only to the Civil War era?
Well, they were very unique to just this, to the Civil War era for a number of reasons. First of all, especially in American military history, we had never fought a war on that scale before. And so we're talking armies that were over 100,000 men strong, right? And the federal government mobilized well over close to 1 million men, over 1 million men, right? And so, and these things ebb and flow. Men signed up for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 2 years, 3 years for the duration of the war. And so the Veteran Reserve Corps was just a practical solution to a problem of manpower, okay? And so when the government's like, hey, instead of sending all these men home who have been injured or had illnesses or disability, how about we send them to the rear echelon duties, the back lines, and so we can release able-bodied men to the front line. So it became a very practical solution. And I mean, you'll see iterations of this in the conflicts of the 20th century. But you know, starting something like this in the Civil War was very unique, and it proved to be incredibly practical. I mean, the Veteran Reserve Corps served long after the Civil War for a couple more years. And I know Day and I are proud to talk about, they weren't supposed to really see active service, but they were involved with a lot of different things, enforcing the draft riots in New York. I mean, talk about a cataclysmic event during the Civil War in 1863. They were there guarding the conspirators and things like that after the Lincoln assassination. They were a part of his burial detail or his escort. And then we talked about they were engaged in battle in 1864 as well. So I think a lot of people were a bit surprised to hear that they were heavily involved in the Battle of Fort Stevens. I'm not surprised at all. A lot of these men had seen action before. They were veterans, right? Who else? I mean, right. So the city is in panic. This is Washington, D.C. They're arming civilians. They're going to the hospitals to arm men as well. And they got the Veteran Reserve Corps that's been hanging out in the city. I would take those guys at the front line before a lot of other units they have in the city, because these men were veterans and were experienced, and they were, from all the accounts that I've read, they were very cool under fire. And you know, there was this gentleman that earned the Medal of Honor at Fort Stevens. It took him about 30 years for him to get awarded the medal, but he was awarded the medal in the 1890s.
Okay. Oh my goodness. Well, that kind of punts back to the secondary question with regards to, if they weren't part of just the Civil War aspect, are there more stories surrounding individuals with disabilities in military history overall, and how do we support getting those stories told?
Jay, you want to take that one? I think we can kind of bounce back on that. I think there's plenty, yeah. Right?
I think there's quite a bit. I think it's figuring out what and where and how to find it. You know, this one started with hearing a song and then finding a little more and finding a little more. And some of the tough things that I know, as an example, what I learned is most of these guys, they started in a regular unit, were injured, were in the Invalid Corps, but when they died and were buried, many were buried under their original unit's name.
Absolutely.
Which is really hard then to you know, because you end up having to cross-reference to double check and make sure it matches to go, yes, this is the same guy with a disability as, which is part of the reason why those primary diaries made it a lot easier to make sure I had the same person. And so that ends up being the toughest thing when you start going back in history, because unless it was something that was specific to disability, or the person was so exceptional in some way that they stood out, that part slowly gets erased. I think one of my favorite things, just disability in general, is to talk about, I love hitting up Howard grads and talk about Oliver Otis Howard. I go, how many of you guys know that he was a man with a disability? And like, I'm like, he's missing an arm. And it's just not something that's so part of it is that kind of I guess detective work.
I think we're just getting. I think we're just getting started, to be honest with you. As interpretation and scholarship really bends and expands and goes to all different aspects of society. We're going to hear more stories about this, right? So I said for the longest time, the focus was always on the military aspect of the Civil War, and specifically what happened in battle. Where was this unit during the battle? You know, where was this leader and all this stuff? And that's really shifted to what brought the men to that battle. Why did they enlist? You know, what about their families at home? What did their families think about them enlisting? My focus really right now in DC is, I heard this number for the longest time: 40 to 50,000 formerly enslaved African Americans escaped slavery and found refuge in Washington, D.C. And so that number like really got to me. Like, that's a lot of people, right? And where did they come from? What was their lives like in enslavement? Were they with their families? What happened to them after the war, right? And so, and I'll say real quickly, when we talk about investigation and doing history, I work for the Civil War Defenses of Washington. The Union Army built all these forts around D.C. You can't just walk into D.C. So I just kind of put it together. If there were that many enslaved African Americans coming into D.C., they had to pass by the forts, right? And so I started going to the regimental histories of the units that were at the forts. And what did I find? Many accounts about this interaction between slavery and freedom on the ground long before the Emancipation Proclamation, right? Really, really intense, dramatic stuff. And it just blew me away, right? And I'm just like, that's the stuff. And I've had visitors at my programs tell me, this is the stuff I'm really looking for. This is what I want to hear.
That's amazing. I thank you so much for kind of digging in and making that connection, the both of you, making these connections throughout history into the present for us. Another interesting question that's come through. Do you feel awards should be awarded posthumously to the individuals that served in the Invalid Corps? And if so, how can we do that?
Wow. Yeah, that's a great question.
You've got it coming.
Yeah. Yeah. So this gentleman, and I'll be posting about him in December, because that's like the anniversary of when he was awarded the medal. I think 28 years after the action, which was the second day of the Battle of Fort Stevens, July 12th, 1864. There's a lot of work that goes into that. I suggest visitors or the viewers look online. Just look up Alonzo Cushing, Cushing. He was awarded the Medal of Honor for his action at Gettysburg, like 150 years after the battle, right? And there's a really cool presentation in the White House with President Obama and this descendant that, you know, she put a lot of work. I think she took decades into pursuing this, right? And, you know, talked to a local congressman and like that, and then just went through Congress and was finally nominated. And then it has to be reviewed by the U.S. military, or obviously the Army, right? The second, you know, the War Department and all that stuff. I call it the War Department. They don't call that anymore. But it takes some time. I think if viewers are really interested in like kind of honoring them, kind of what Day was talking about. You were spot on. This gentleman, by the way, he mentions his headstone has his original regiment. It does not have the 1st Veteran Reserve Corps, which is like, oh man. So I think, you know, if we identify these names and we identify what graves they are at, we could put little little markers and things at their graves to kind of add more context to that and be like, hey, they were part of the Veteran Reserve Corps. I think that would be a good start. And if we come across more battles where they were heavily engaged and we read more accounts, then it's possible. Yes.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
Yeah, it really is finding those personal little bits, or the bits of regimental history. And the hard thing is when you find something, because I did find something about this gentleman, but the one thing I found was a teeny tiny postage stamp type image where it talks about, the same bullet that shot him shot his best friend.
That's right. Exactly. Right.
I want to see a picture of him. Look at me, and his buddy in a sling. Look at me. And I'm like, I want that photo, but I could only find like a photocopy that's been scanned so many times. It's about postage stamp size. And I'm like, oh, it's killing me. It's killing me.
Yeah, I mean, and I'll add real quick. I think it would be difficult. It was easier with Gettysburg because it's been so well documented and written about, especially from the veterans, right? You have to have primary source accounts. This gentleman with the 1st Veteran Reserve Corps, there was enough information about him and his involvement in the battle, which was, I think he was nominated by one of his former officers, right, which helps. But, you know, this is in the period after the war where these men are still alive, right? And there's a lot of veterans organizations and things like that. That said, it doesn't stop us from honoring the service of these people and really talking about their stories. I'm actually really interested to learn about them after the Civil War. You know, when they hang up the uniform, what was it like for them to go home, you know, and be disabled or have chronic illness and spend time with their families? Were they able to readjust? And there's been some new scholarship about that. And a lot of it has really shown us that they were not able to adjust. A lot, even the men that were not wounded or seriously injured were, you know, traumatized, you can imagine, by the war. And so I think there's a lot more scholarship on that coming out, which I think helps us understand, you know, PTSD, you know, and what happens to soldiers coming home today. It's been quite the evolution.
Yeah, we found one. It was part of a diary. It wasn't written by the soldier, but by his sister, because he had ended up moving in with her because he couldn't take care of himself. And it was and it was a bit about the struggle in him. And then it was he was talking about he's, and it was only, she's like, he was having real difficulty with. And then this one night, and then the next few pages, her kids, I guess, it got to it because it's just been scribbled all over in like pencil, crayon, I don't know what. And I'm like, no, and the page is missing and chewed on, and I'm like,
heartbreaking. Oh, I can feel your pain at that moment. No.
Yeah, a lot of the letters didn't end well. Like you said, when they went home, the stories didn't end well.
Did not. But as you said, something that could help us inform what's going on in the present.
Absolutely.
From that perspective. Dave, we do have a question for you in the chat. As a documentary filmmaker, did you enjoy directing the reenactments?
Well, that's a great question.
I'll be honest, when I first started this film, I was adamant that I didn't want to use reenactments. I was afraid it would be cheesy and tacky, which is why you'll see a lot of the early stuff has very heavy into using slight animations with some of the images. But as we went further along, I'm like, there was no visuals. There's nothing there. And so we ended up going, yep, we're going to have to do, we're going to have to include some reenactments. And we tried to keep our hours that we did simple and small, so they aren't quite as cheesy as part of that. But I've also seen a reenactment on film when it is done well, and you're focusing on, and this is the difference between, and this one mine was used for battle scenes, but I'll tell you, when you've seen the personal scenes done for reenactment, especially if someone's got diaries and quotes and things and can use those, that can be very very meaningful.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I would add to that, in the Park Service, we don't call it reenacted, we call it living history, right? And it's our goal. It's because we don't have them shooting at each other and things like that. But it's a good visual for people to see what the uniforms, the smell of the gunpowder. You know, the soldiers talked about they fired so many times with their black powder muskets that it would cover up like the sky and stuff. And if we have enough reenactors, we can make that happen, right? And so a lot of people get this takeaway. It's like, wow, that I've never heard that sound before. That smell. That's the visual that we want people to understand, and it's a really good way to connect people to our sites and our stories.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, we do have a secondary question in here, and it's kind of all encompassing for everybody. What do you hope people will take away from this film and from the work that we're doing with regards to exposing these stories?
Wow, that's the
Dave,
question
you
I
can
think
take a stab, and then Steve, you can take a stab.
Ooh, yeah, Steve, you're gonna have to close it hard then.
Okay, I got you.
I get the easy job. So I guess in some ways a couple things. So from this film, one, I hope you enjoy it, right? Because I don't want folks to say, oh my God, one more Civil War film I don't want to watch. So I think part of ours was to try and keep it interesting, which is why we kept the number of historians down. And I know at one point I wanted to cut them out completely and just have the soldiers themselves tell the story. And that's actually one of the big things for me, is because every one of those soldiers was a soldier with a disability. Every person voicing the soldier, I think, except maybe one, all have disabilities. And we included veterans as well. We wanted folks to have a chance to basically tell their own stories. Was a big part of that. So I guess one of the things to take away from that film, one is that kind of Ugh. Nope. No, see, I lost my train of thought. Well, I said one, enjoy it. Two, yeah, two would be I think finding that sense of authenticity in the storytelling, which is part of the reason I
Mhm.
wanted to only use um, narrators and voice actors and folks with disabilities or who were veterans. Otherwise, I didn't want to do it. To keep that
Right.
as a part of it. And I will say, actually, more than 80% of our crew all had, and cast actually all had disabilities in some of some sort.
Wow.
That was it was
Yeah,
one of the
that's
things we
really
wanted to do
passionate.
from the beginning. The other was the whole festival is about community stories. Everybody thinks they have to do a documentary about these grand battles, you know, like that. That's the big things in history,
Mhm.
or these huge tragic stories. Poor Baltimore gets caught up in tragedy stories all the time. But the thing is, the stories
Right.
in your neighborhood and the personal stories and the interactions and the people, those are the things that
Mm.
kind of connect us all. And I think while this still gets caught up in some of the battles, I'm hoping that the individual stories of the soldiers are the parts that people caught, like the surgeon crying in his bed at night over this. Those are the things that I thought were important. So I think that's it. That those are the biggest things. Are those the kind of stories that are in your neighborhood, the kinds of personal stories, and the ones that you don't see in the big part of it. Like I said, I've a vested interest in disability. That's what I wanted to show that was missing. And I think it's kind of like Steve and the Asian and Pacific Islander. Those stories are waiting to be told. They deserve it.
Mm.
Um, so I guess part of it is like, well, like I said, I hope you get folks get it from this, but I hope it excites you and gives you curiosity to go find out those other personal, intimate stories in your neighborhood.
Mm. And Steve?
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. My focus as a historian and park ranger is to get people to come out to our sites,
Right.
and so like, why are we here? Why are we preserving this history? Why are we preserving these landscapes? And what I have found that these landscapes and these stories have meanings, different meanings for each individual person, for different groups of people. Um, my family is not from the United States. My family did not serve in the Civil War, but my family served in the Vietnam War, so our Civil
Mhm.
War, right? And so one of the reasons why I really got into the American Civil War is to understand more about my family history and what it means to
Okay.
have, a country torn apart by conflict and by war and what happens afterward. And my family fleeing Vietnam and finding refuge in the United States. How many people were displaced by the Civil War in the 1860s? Millions of people were, right? And how do
Mm.
they find life afterward? What happens next? What's the future about, right? And so
Mhm.
that's what I want people to see with this film. It's like, yeah, you might have not heard about them before, the Veteran Reserve Corps, the Invalid Corps. Did that inspire you to kind of learn a little bit more about not only just people with disabilities, but maybe other
Mhm.
groups of individuals or groups of people or individuals that served in the Civil War or connected to the Civil War that might not even worn a uniform, right? I'm the more I look at this, as inspired as this documentary it inspires
Mhm.
me even more to look beyond, right? And I'm
Mhm.
really curious to hopefully we can find more letters and diaries of them talking about kind of what this war means to them and hopefully what it
Mhm.
means for them moving forward and obviously their families. It's their wives and their children,
Right.
their parents. Can you imagine having your son or daughter, your son, your husband, your brother away? He's seriously wounded, and instead of coming home, which he's allowed to do, he signs up for the Veteran Reserve Corps.
Right.
You're like, why don't you just come home? He's like, well, he still had some unfinished business to do, right? Maybe he still
Right.
wanted to take care of his family. He still wanted to serve his country, right? There's just so much more meaning we can find beyond the battlefield, and I think today's documentary it provides much inspiration for people to do that.
Yes, I love how you said that beyond the battlefield. I know that 2020 has not looked in any way, shape, or form the way we thought it would for 8830, but I like that we kept moving forward and took this film beyond that, and that it has given a touchstone for us to remember that this is the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, that this is the time where we actually get to understand, tell, and remember these stories. And thank the both of you for being a part of that. Data was another small technical question in the chat. They wanted to know what was your favorite part of the movie. And I'm going to ask this question, even though I don't think that it should qualify or make necessarily a difference. But as a blind filmmaker, what did you find to be the most challenging part of making the film?
Ooh, it was hard to do favorite part. Can't, I'm so sorry. I'm gonna have to cop out on that one because I don't have a good answer. I, the one thing I really wanted to do was to make sure there's so many quotes in that because I really wanted to have the soldiers speak for themselves. And so we tried to
Hmm.
pick people who we could find the most from diaries, letters, anything we could, so we could have them tell that section. So each section almost you'll have a guide, and that to me was the favorite part, was being able to have a person tell the story. They're not a general, they're not somebody fan, they're just a soldier. And granted, there's a certain at the time, yeah, there's a certain privilege because they could read and write enough for their family to have kept it, but at the same time, it's their story. So that was my favorite.
Right.
As a blind filmmaker, I'm like, yeah, there's always that with any disability out from an outside perspective, there's always a question of capacity. Can you do the job?
Hmm.
I had an advantage in the fact that I'm doing it myself. Two, working with my wife and a small team of folks, we did the research ourselves, so we already had a lot of the early information. So
Right.
it became easy to do it as our story. Um, and for anybody who wonders how does a blind person make a film, I'm like, you storyboard it out. I'm like, here's the research source, here's
Yes.
the narrative narration and the text, here's the quotes, here's the
Right.
kinds of images I think I'd like to find, and then basically I can have somebody else help find those images, special
Right.
sound effects, transitions, and then working with a really good editor to make that happen. I mean, and guess what? That's the way a lot of people make films, even without who aren't visually impaired.
There. Yes.
So there is that aspect as well. So
Wow.
the best thing though is there are a lot of great local filmmaking organizations and humanities organizations that support local history and local filmmaking and basically local stories. And I think, like I said, you're always going to hear me go back to we should be looking at our local stories and our local sources. So there's a great big old shout out to the NPS at the end of the film,
Hmm.
because you guys had done so much groundwork already. It made it easy for me to be able to help build the original framing of the documentary and know that this actually could go somewhere. And I
Right.
think that's one of the big things also, is to see what there is. There are public scholars and community storytellers and historians and local groups and organizations. It's just putting it together. So
Yeah.
um, yeah, I think I
Yes.
might have sidestepped the question a little bit, but
No, no, I think you answered it perfectly. As a person with disability, we just did this whole session on disability stigma and the underestimating of individuals with regards to capacity and finding funding and things of that nature.
yeah.
But
And I would
you
say
just
on the funding, we could not really find funding. This actually came from the community. We actually crowdfunded the entire film. So it was folks who were interested in living history. It was folks who were interested
okay.
in the Civil War. It was folks with disabilities. Those are the folks who helped make this movie. So they are as big a part of it and contribute to it as much as I did. And so I will always be grateful to that.
Yes, absolutely. Steve, did you want to jump in here?
I just, I'm just so proud to be a part of this, to be a supporter of this documentary and supporting people with disabilities, and to really to highlight its history in the probably one of the most tragic conflicts in American history, um,
Mhm.
a conflict that saw the end of slavery and the birth of freedom for well over 4 million enslaved people. Right. There's just I think this is just the beginning, to be honest with you. And I think you make a
Right.
great point as well. It was 2020, and you see a lot of organizations, especially historic sites and parks, that really adopting and really embracing this and saying, hey, this is an opportunity for us to engage the public, a wider, more diverse public. Let's do it, right? And
Mhm.
I think this is just demonstrates that what has happened, what can happen when we do something like that.
Absolutely. What should we ask the people for 2021? Do you need more um, film ambassadors? Do we need more? I think there was a junior park ranger participation program at one point. I don't know if that's gone online. What resources should we be putting in? Who do we need to write to in Congress to say we need to have these stories told and this type of education intersection, educational entertainment, arts, humanities intersection uplifted and brought together? What do we want to see for 2021?
I'll say that because I deal with I interact a lot with parents and school groups and students and things like that. That continue to be inspired, and continue to keep your mind open to learning new things and new opportunities. And if you can't come out to our parks, we can come out to your sites. All right, we can do that digitally. We can connect our resources to you, and we can bring. And so what I found this so important about this and revealing is, I think for a lot of people, they just the way a lot of us were raised as history was about dates and remembering facts and things like that. And now we're really remembering stories and human beings and perspectives, right? And I think for a lot of young people, that can interest them in understanding more about themselves, their families, where their families came from, and kind of like where they are at in this ever-changing and complex world. So that's what I hope for.
Right, and I'm gonna. I know we're probably running short on time or overtime, but I also want to point out that Civil War Defense Force, we have a Facebook. You've got a Facebook page with Facebook videos regularly.
That's right.
Check out Steve on those, and you can get like fun video snippets and other things that come up pretty regularly. So just want
I was going to say, I mean, I'll get off my philosophical bandwagon there, my podium. But yeah, we've got a lot of resources. I work for the National Park Service, so just look up Civil War Defenses of Washington. We've got an MPS page, website. We got a Facebook page. We have an Instagram page. And you can contact us directly on all three of those apparatuses. Okay, and if you got a specific question, just let us know. We'd be happy to answer them. If you got a program that you'd like to do or you're interested in, just let us know. We have volunteers, people that help us do research and stuff like that. So we're here for you. And thanks for sharing that, Angela. Facebook.com/CWDWMPS. So we hope to see you around.
Yeah, I just had to do that shout out for that and point that. I'm like, no, you have to talk about your page.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I was so deep.
No,
I was so deep. I felt like this was a philosophy class for a second, but I appreciate that.
No. You guys have been thoroughly inspiring. And Day, where can we go to support you and what we hope to see? I heard somewhere, maybe it was just wishful thinking, a documentary on Miss Elizabeth Proctor, possibly, maybe. Where can we go to support you and some of the other writing that you are doing? I believe I just saw something posted. Oh, forgive me. I want to say peg leg.
Yes.
Yes.
So, so the easiest place to find me is, it's actually, my name is dayalmohammed.com. Hopefully the website is up. We've been having some issues. Or invalidcorpsfilm.com is the other place. So one of the next projects one of the things I like to do and want to do so clearly I have a vested interest in disability and disability history. And like I said, just like the Invalid Corps, as a community, we're missing this huge cultural legacy. And I want to talk about amazing folks with disabilities and their contributions. And so a more recent thing you guys can check out is on PBS Digital Studios, and find that link for folks, it's just a short, it's not a film yet. I'm hoping to get that. That's fine. It's just a short little essay about Gouverneur Morris. And so this is a gentleman with a peg leg from the time of the American Revolution, and some of the things that he did that were kind of amazing and kind of outrageous. He's definitely a character. And that's the thing is I wanted to tell, someone says you should, in any kind of character or person you put forward in a work, whether it is fiction, whether it's nonfiction, whether it's on film or on paper, you want to always be able to walk all the way around a person. You want to make them a 360 degree person. And so one of the things for Gouverneur Morris It's not just him, a man with a disability. This is one of our founding fathers, with a peg leg, who helped actually write our Constitution. That preamble, "We the people," that's his fault. But also put some fun things in there that I'm like, yes, he's we think about them as guys with the white wigs and the stuffy suits. I'm like, this is a guy who was in the middle of the French Revolution, and when the revolution was there and they're shaking his carriage, he whips off his peg leg, waves out the window, goes, "Viva Revolution!" and they leave him alone. So, this is also a guy who got thrown out of France at that time because they caught him in a plot trying to rescue Marie Antoinette. So so these are the kinds of stories that are amazing parts of history with some amazing people, but you never get to hear about them. So that's the first of what I believe are going to be 3 essays. So this is Gouverneur Morris, and then there'll be a couple more of folks with disabilities and the amazing things they've done. So I'm hoping that will be something I can do in more detail going forward. And I'm like, Elizabeth Proctor Thomas keeps bugging me, but I'm like, oh, but I know there's plenty of folks interested in her. So like I said, she's going to get her own documentary, a big one day. And I'm like, I have no doubt.
I think so too. I hope so.
And be part of it. That's wonderful. I know we're going to be closing out shortly, and I wanted to make sure that you guys got the last word in. But we also want to pay homage and thank and look forward to 2021 for the Community Stories Film Festival. We want to make sure that this platform keeps going. We want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to come and tell their community story. I think I like the way Dave put it best. It doesn't always have to be about that big battle. I think it's the personal stories within the community that really kind of bring us all together and give us that connection and that sense of history going forward. We're in the middle of history right now. Think about that. Bring that forward, bring that fruition, and make sure that you're telling it for the next generation.
Well said.
I got nothing. There you go. Boom.
Yes. I don't know how we're going to be closing out shortly. Were there any to my family online? Are there any other additional questions? Any other things that we want to put forth? I know that you guys have been talking, but not necessarily reading all the comments in the chat. I do hope you get an opportunity to go through it because it's been nothing but love, love, love. There were a lot of good questions, but every other question, the next thing was, I love the documentary. Thank you so much for the work that you do with the National Park Services. When can you come to my school? When our school is going to reopen? But all those things going down and moving forward. But you now know that they will come to you virtually if you want to be there. So we want to stay in touch. We want to stay in contact, and we want to make sure that we move forward in 2021.
Cheers. Thank you so much.
Cheers.
Right, so
thank you,
thank you guys
guys.
for your stories. Thank you, Docs in Progress.
Yeah, thanks for hosting us.
Thank you.